1960, an important year not just for cinema, but for the world. After the conservative 50s, everything was about to change. Little did anyone know at this point, but the decade they were entering into would see the dawn of rock music, the hippie movement, free love, LSD, civil rights, the birth control pill, and of course, a whole new dawn of filmmaking. Horror in particular was about to change forever. Until this point, horror movies had belonged in gothic mansions in far-off lands and concerned themselves with monsters and vampires, genetically mutated insects or ghosts. But in 1960, two prestigious British directors made movies set in the present day about seemingly introverted everyday men who just happened to enjoy stabbing women to death in their spare time. Join me as we continue discussing the evolution of the slasher by reviewing two game-changing masterpieces, Michael Powell's Peeping Tom and Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Welcome to episode 3 of the podcast. My name is Mike. I am your host as ever. If you are just joining us for the first time, then welcome. But also, go back and listen to episodes 1 and 2. They're excellent. If you want to get in touch with us, then please do email. It's evolutionofhorror@gmail.com, or you can find us on Twitter @evolutionpod. I've got a really exciting episode coming up for you today. I'm going to be introducing my guest host shortly, and we're going to be talking about Psycho and Peeping Tom. But I've also got a very special conversation with film musician and film historian Neil Brand, and he's going to be giving us a little lesson on a history of music in horror movies. And we will of course be talking about that iconic Bernard Herman score for Psycho. So all of that and more to come. Now let me introduce my co-host. Now this guy is almost as passionate about movies as I am. He's a film PR, he works in marketing for Trafalgar Releasing, but he also is a reviewer and a writer. He writes for Front Row Reviews, he's involved in Fright Fest. He's basically an all-round cinephile and horror nerd, much like myself. I am very, very excited to welcome my good friend, Ollie Charles. Ollie, welcome.
Thank you very much.
It feels like absolutely weeks ago I asked you to be on this podcast. It's taken a very long time to organise this. You're a busy man.
It has been, yeah. Well, thank you. It has been. I like to think I'm busy. It's mostly just staring at walls. I'm excited to be here, and it has been a while that we've been talking about this. And we met up over Fright Fest.
We did.
To discuss this very podcast.
Exactly.
And dated actually meeting and doing it.
Exactly.
So I'm glad.
And here we are. And we're in your trendy Shoreditch offices right now. It's super trendy. There's like a table football. There's a Smeg fridge. There's, exposed brickwork. Everything you could imagine from a Shoreditch media office.
Don't give away all the trade secrets. Why are you doing that?
So for people that don't know, Ollie, tell us a little bit about you and what you do.
I do PR and marketing at Trafalgar Releasing. I also write for Front Row Reviews.
And you were quite, because I met you at Fright Fest, and obviously you were quite actively involved in Fright Fest as well, weren't you?
Yeah, I was about to try and get onto how I do horror stuff, and I was like, thank you for that little segue in, because I didn't know how I was going to do that otherwise. So I now I do some of the Q&As and introductions for the guys at Fright Fest, and I'm good friends with the team at Fright Fest, and they're an incredible bunch of people, and the volunteers are also just quite incredible.
Yeah.
I suppose, I don't want to preempt any of your questions, but it kind of helps going into how I got into Fright Fest and how I got into horror full stop, or like my interest in horror.
Yeah.
So, long story short, and for those listening, and for those who know me as well, I don't do long story shorts. So I'll try.
That's the beauty of a podcast. You can go long.
Just
That's
keep going.
Fine. Yeah.
I've just done my 6th Fright Fest this year. So 6 years ago, I was pretty much like afraid of my own shadow. Like I would not watch a single horror film, which I'm pleased I'm now telling everyone listening to this horror podcast. I literally was completely like just never something that I would ever do. I was working at the time at Peccadillo Pictures, and I worked on an Italian alien film, on a film called The Arrival of Wang, which we took to Fright Fest, and it was like a month after I'd started working at Peccadillo, and this is like a month after I'd finished university, so it was my first job in the real world. And we got to the festival, and I met Alan Jones, and I met Greg Day.
Alan Jones, who's going to be on the podcast next week, actually talking about GIALLO. But anyway, sorry, carry on.
Fantastic. We were there with the filmmakers and with the lead actress, and I just got this feeling of this passion from everyone, and this interest and this love, and it was like a real family of people who came every year to the festival, and they watch everything, and they, you know, stand in the lobbies, and they talk about the films and the things they like, the things they didn't like, and they're just incredibly passionate people that they just see each other year in, year out. And there was something about being in that atmosphere and speaking to those people that just was like, I kind of want this. Like, I want to know what this is.
You kind of found your people as well. Sometimes it feels like when you're there.
Well, it really was, and it was just like I don't quite get what it is. What are they getting out of horror that I wasn't getting out of horror? So being at the festival and meeting the guys, they gave me a couple of tickets for a couple of films. Which was, you know, some of the potentially lesser scary films, more thrillers, I suppose. And, you know, I sat there and I was enjoying myself, and that's all great. And I kind of, that's where it all began, I suppose. I've not missed a Fright Fest since. And I suppose I, you know, spent the last couple of years catching up on those horror films that I did. We were talking about this before. The stuff that I didn't watch as a teenager or as a kid, and watching the classics, and then watching all the films that are coming out now. Now it's gone, you know, it's become my favourite genre.
That's
and
great.
I watch as much horror as I can. It's really funny.
And that's nice. That's like quite a nice different perspective to a lot of the people we've spoken to on this that have, you know, a couple of weeks ago I had Liv and Anna from The Final Girls, and they were sort of saying, you know, oh, first time I watched The Nightmare on Elm Street I was 9, or first time I watched this I was, you know, 8, whatever it might be. So most of your horror movie sort of, education has come in the last few years, basically. You've seen everything since you were an adult. Which is a good, interesting, different perspective.
100%. Like, only in the last, I mean, I would say maybe 3 to 4 years. So I'm 26 now. So that's, you know, whatever 4 years off that is. 22.
Yeah.
Numbers, strong suit. Yeah, exactly. But but like watching, as you say, the Halloweens and the Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah.
I'd seen Scream. I was a film student, so Scream is sort of like, you have to watch Scream.
Yes.
Because you are them. Those I watched. But like, I was saying, only this week I watched Misery for the first time.
Yeah.
You know, and I watched, what else I watched recently this year? You know, Amityville Horror I watched for the first time this year. So I'm getting through them all.
Yeah.
And I'm making, you know, my decisions about what I think about them based, as you say, as an adult.
Yes. But this week we're talking about Psycho and Peeping Tom. What about those two? I mean, had you just watched these two for the first time for the podcast, or had you seen both of them before in the past? Or?
So I watched Psycho like years and years ago, and I mean, as I say, I work in film. I was a film student.
Yeah, you can't really escape Hitchcock.
You can't. Exactly. I've had a big DVD set of Hitchcock, the black set that absolutely everybody
I've got that
owns.
One.
Yeah.
I was a film student too, so
exactly.
Of course it was like
everyone
mandatory.
owns that box set, and I watched Psycho. Who knows how many years ago? And for me, like, it's interesting actually to be talking about it on this podcast, because it's one of those ones that came into sort of the more thriller-esque.
Yeah.
And thrillers have always been something that I've enjoyed, and I suppose that's a really good entry place into the slasher, and then how horror has evolved, which is obviously something you're talking about on this podcast, over time through the slasher, and how, you know, you can compare things like Halloween to Peeping Tom to Psycho to what I'm trying to think of a modern day slasher. I mean, we were talking about Tragedy Girls.
Yes, exactly. Like the sort of most recent ones. Yeah,
exactly. And then I'm sure that I'm missing a bunch of even gorier, more violent things in the middle.
But it's a fine line, that, isn't it? Thriller and horror, and where you draw the line, especially with something like Psycho, because you know, you could definitely argue both, and it's hard to. I talked about this with Kim Newman. Like, what is the fundamental difference? I don't really know. He was saying that, you know, really interestingly, Silence of the Lambs is one that a lot of people think of as a horror, but then you could compare it to something like Manhunter, which is very much considered a thriller, but they're essentially almost the same story. They're both about Hannibal Lecter, but it's more about the way that one is kind of shot and lit and scored, and Psycho has, and Kim Newman talked about this as well, it has elements of both. I think it's kind of got like gothic, like when you're in the Bates house and there's the corpse and there's that kind of real horror stuff, and then there's a lot of it is just like, you know, you're watching a Hitchcock thriller, I suppose, isn't it? Like a woman on the run and all that kind of thing.
Well, this was one of the things that I really love about horror, and it's something that I've obviously learned in the last couple of years, is that it's, I think, more than any other genre, and I hope I'm not overstepping by saying it, but I think it's one of the most all-encompassing genres. Like, you can have comedy horror, or, as you say, thriller.
Yes.
You can have psychological horror. You can have, you know, drama and horror.
Yeah.
You know, you can, something like Get Out, for example, is, I think, a really good example of you know, a dramatic storyline, something that has very, you know, many comparisons to race drama and to any kind of drama that you might have there.
It's like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, but with horror, isn't it?
Exactly. So I think with horror, then that is one of the most interesting things about the genre, is that actually it's so encompassing. It's not a little box. You can't box horror up into something. You know, and as you say, Kim was talking about, it could be down to the way something's filmed.
Yeah.
It could be the lighting. But then there's, you know, you get connotations from the people that are in the film. You get connotations from, whether, you know, a director.
Yeah.
You know, just by saying something, you know, is directed by Hitchcock, you've already got a certain set of connotations in your head.
Yeah.
Which is why this podcast is particularly, or the two films we're talking about today, I think are particularly interesting, because obviously, so you don't necessarily, sure, you get some of that darkness, you get that very dark British sensitivity, but Peeping Tom almost takes it that step further, which I know is something we're going to talk about today, in that, you know, in the ways that it potentially ruined his career and the negative feedback he got from that film. But no, to answer your question way back when you asked it, I had seen Psycho long time ago and loved Psycho, because you can't not love Psycho. It's, you know, Janet Leigh screaming in the shower.
Absolutely amazing.
One of the most iconic scenes in the history of cinema.
Yeah.
I had never watched Peeping Tom until you asked me to do this particular episode.
Right.
And I bought it on Blu-ray.
Nice.
I think it's Canal. It's a really beautiful... It was Optimum, but it now Canal, obviously. It's a really beautiful restoration, some anniversary edition or whatever. It's the one that you can get now. Really beautiful, really crisp. And I'd never seen it before. I'd read about it, and I bloody loved it.
Excellent. Good to know. That's awesome. And like, it's interesting what you're saying about, you know, the kind of the genre itself, because I feel like these are the two films in 1960 when the net kind of widened on what is horror. I feel like before this, there were a few exceptions, but before this, a lot of what horror films were gothic mansions, or, you know, monsters, aliens, extraterrestrials, big giant spiders, or The Thing from Another World, or Frankenstein, or Dracula, or any of that. And suddenly these were two movies in the same year that were about these weird two introverted men who kind of live normal present day lives, but also enjoy just sort of quietly murdering people. So yeah, like all of a sudden,
as you do,
which obviously is such a huge thing in horror now. And you look at these two films and you think, yeah, I've seen all this before in every other film that came after it. But, you know, these are the two films that kind of invented it, really, aren't they? It feels like, at least.
And if I remember correctly, I might be completely wrong. I'm just looking at this article that I mentioned to you before. But I think Peeping Tom actually was released first.
It was.
Which I think is really interesting, because obviously Psycho is the one that everyone talks about today. It's the one that, you know... was the thing that was one of the films that, you know, kind of makes Hitchcock who he is.
Yeah.
You know? And yet Peeping Tom did the opposite.
Did it first. It's craziness. It's absolutely crazy. Well, let's do it. Let's get into it then. So let's start. We'll go in chronological order, and let's begin by talking about Michael Powell's Peeping Tom.
Look out! Look out! Look out! Take care. You are being watched. We repeat, take care. For you are now alone with a killer. We warn you, don't let him see the fear in your eyes. For this is what he seeks, and this is why he kills.
Where are you? Where are you?
Now, before we get started, I am going to do a big, fat, loud, clear spoiler warning. We will be talking about Peeping Tom and later Psycho in depth from beginning to end. So if you haven't seen these movies, what are you doing? Go and watch them and come back. So, to very briefly run through the plot of Peeping Tom, this is a movie directed by Michael Powell in 1960, and it stars Carl Boehm. I think that's how you pronounce it, Boehm. And he plays Mark Lewis. Mark Lewis is a very interesting character. The film begins with Mark Lewis watching through his camera as he stalks a woman in an alley. We're kind of seeing all of this through his camera. He approaches this woman, who turns out to be a prostitute. She invites him back up to her flat, and he murders her. And we watch the murder sort of through his eyes. As the story then continues, you see that he's this cameraman. He's a sort of freelance. He works on films, he works in porn, he works in sort of other odd jobs, and he's also quietly, on the side, murdering prostitutes, and he's filming it, and he's putting together what he calls his own documentary of fear. Now, all the while this is going on, he's actually befriending and sparking a romance with the girl that lives downstairs in his block of flats. Her name's Helen, and she's played by Anna Massey. And then at this point, he's kind of torn, and we're torn with him. Should we fear Mark? Should we sympathise with him? Is he a danger to this woman living downstairs, or does he genuinely care about her? He is a murderer, and he's also a sympathetic character. This is a lot for audiences to take in 1960. So cue a series of awkward relationship moments and a lot of real brutal, graphic, voyeuristic murders. Just in case anyone can hear any background noise, we're on top of it. Just to make this office even more Shoreditch, we are above a nightclub. So there may be some... And it's only about 7 o'clock in the evening, isn't it?
This is it's a Thursday, though.
Right.
So Thursday is the new Friday.
Of course it is.
And 7 o'clock on a Thursday after evening is the time.
It's Friday night. Okay. Well, there you go. Right. Well, we'll just carry on. But interesting. Do you know what I love about this film as well that you get from the opening scene as well is that you get a real kind of proper portrayal of London and not kind of glamorized London. Like this is seedy Soho London, isn't it? It literally starts. It opens on. I recognise the street. It's Newman Street because I've worked there in an edit house before, in Fitzrovia. Amazing. And there's this little alley.
I love that.
Yeah, it's so cool. And it's literally they're filming in this alley called Newman Alley, I think it is. And I walked through that alley every day on my way to work when I work on the BBC Film Show, and I was like, there you go. And obviously now it's super posh and expensive, but it was great to see real London there.
That opening sequence, I genuinely believe, like, it is gone down in history as one of my favourite opening sequences in a film. It's so interesting that you're looking at it through the eyes of the camera. It's one of the best portrayals of voyeurism and of point of view filmmaking that I've ever seen.
Totally.
I know that's a very big statement, but I just think it was so interesting the way that you don't see everything, because obviously, as an audience member, we're going to very much be at the helm of the character, we're going to be at the helm of the director, and yet we are looking at it through a lens, through an eye. Is it Carl's eye? Is he, is he's kind of showing us what he wants to show us?
Yeah.
And that whole sequence and following that prostitute, you're not quite sure where you are. You're not quite sure what's happening.
Yeah.
You know that there's something that's going to happen. It's suspenseful.
Yeah.
It's sort of, she's probably going to end up dead.
Yes.
Or thereabouts.
Yes. It's interesting, isn't it? I wonder how much people knew that at the time when it came out, because obviously you watch it now and you think, of course. And it must be one of the first instances where we get this real point of view of the killer. And now if you look at most slasher movies, Halloween onwards, there is an opening scene in which we are looking through the killer's point of view as he's stalking a woman about to kill her. And it's like Peeping Tom must have, I'm sure, there may have been earlier examples, but it must be one of the earliest first examples to do this.
The film was an X rating. It was rated X.
Yeah.
So I'm sure people walked in with some suspicions about what they were about to see. And there was I hope you don't mind me jumping ahead a little bit, but there was one quote on here that you've provided to me from The Spectator.
Yes.
The sickest and filthiest film I remember seeing. I just think that kind of sums it up. I think it's really interesting. I think what's really interesting is that we're in 1960, and this is the sickest film she's ever seen.
Yeah. But what I find really fascinating is that Psycho didn't have this reaction, and Psycho has got, a naked woman being stabbed to death in the shower quite brutally for the time, and yet this didn't. This has, this, I don't know if it's more graphic necessarily, this movie, but there's something about it that really offended people, and I wonder if it is that you're also so aligned with the killer, Mark Lewis. Yeah. You're kind of almost sympathise with him throughout, don't you? You know, he is this kind of half sympathetic character.
You want to know what's going on. You want to know why he is the way he is, because you're aligned with him. You kind of need to know why you're seeing what you're seeing.
Yeah.
The other thing with Peeping Tom, and obviously I know we'll talk about Psycho when we get to it, but the thing with Peeping Tom is that it's dirty and it is grubby.
Yes, it is.
And it's the back streets of London. And, within 3 seconds of the opening, we've met a prostitute.
Yeah.
Not that, connotations of prostitution,
that
one has. And it is dark, and he does work in pornography. And so the film is just layers on.
It does.
All those various things, those various elements that are making you go, oh, I want to scrub myself. It's grotty.
Totally. It is grotty. It is. It feels like the sort of film that back in 1960 you should have watched at some sort of Soho cinema, probably it was hard 100%. To get,
And there's only going to be a few, limited seating in that cinema.
Yes.
And, the people out in the cinema aren't really recommending that you go and watch it because you're probably going to walk out at some point. And I imagine most people did.
Yeah. I mean, it's because actually you get this opening scene, which is, slasher all over, really. Again, it wasn't following a formula at the time, but you've got this woman who is a prostitute. So obviously, in kind of these conservative slasher terms, she's the kind of promiscuous character that is punished for it, with a very, very phallic weapon, which we should talk about as well.
Oh my God. Phallic. Oh, we'll get onto that.
Outrageously phallic. Again, a big slasher trope. And then essentially, as soon as that's finished, that opening scene, then we get this weird scene in the newsagent where that old man comes in to buy porn. And again, it's like, wow, this is for 1960, this old man basically asking for behind-the-counter pictures.
Oh, it's so funny, though.
It is funny.
It's funny now.
It's funny now, but I wonder, again, what people thought back then. And what's even weirder about it is that you get that scene followed by the scene of a little girl, a schoolgirl, coming in to buy a chocolate bar.
And they're hiding the pornography from her. He's hiding it, isn't he? It's in the folder.
It's in the folder. But you can see pictures of girls in the background of the shot as well, on high up on shelves and things. And then you've got this schoolgirl in the foreground buying a chocolate bar. Like everything. And I imagine it's all of these elements that made people go, this is pure filth.
Well, what I liked about it as well is that the film is real innocence into whatever the opposite of innocence is.
Into corruption. Or,
and that there is so much foreboding in that scene, as you say, this little girl, and on the wall there are pictures that aren't that far cry from the pictures that that Mark takes himself during the film.
Yeah, because he's this very seemingly friendly guy who you'd trust if you saw him on the street potentially, and he has this whole relationship with the character of Helen, who's played by Anna Massey, who's kind of what you might regard now in hindsight as our kind of final girl. She's out very sweet, very innocent, like virginal 21-year-old who lives downstairs in his apartment block, and she kind of befriends him, doesn't she?
Can I just point out, she lives with her blind mother.
Yes, I
mean, this film has so many layers.
It does, and this is again why I'm so shocked that critics didn't love this film, didn't lap it up at the time, because it's all about filmmaking, it's all about voyeurism, it's all about
what you see and what you don't see. Anyway, who knows what they were thinking. I was, when I was researching for this before we came here, and I saw lots of positive things being written about the film and people almost changing their opinions as well.
I think everyone has now, haven't they? Yeah.
I mean, I just don't think that you can be negative about this film. I mean,
no.
I mean, sure, there are moments where you can go, it looks a bit dated. And again, that's something we can talk about with Psycho, in that I think Psycho probably doesn't have that. I think Psycho feels quite as...
bit more
modern.
timeless.
Yeah, exactly. And that might be down to the world that Peeping Tom was made in. Maybe it's the British film industry versus the American film industry. And et cetera. It could be many things. But Peeping Tom, he befriends, as you say, this is almost the first final girl. This film, along with Psycho, yes, but this film has created all these tropes that we just take for granted, and now we see them and we're like, oh, this again.
Yeah, exactly. But nothing had been done before. And again, Psycho is so often cited as the first one to do it. What is going on?
I mean, seriously, it feels like a pneumatic drill.
Yeah, it's very weird. But Psycho is so often cited as the original film to do all these tropes. But as we've mentioned, this came out earlier, only a few months earlier, but earlier, significantly.
Only a few months, and to great hatred, so probably they probably just put it on the back burner and said, let's just leave it and forget about it.
Exactly.
But no, I just think, you're right. So with Helen, his relationship with this, as you say, 21. She's 21 in this film.
It's her 21st birthday.
It's her 21st birthday. I do love, though, the thought, that 21st birthday where she's got all her friends and all the men are in suits, and all the girls are in their Sunday dresses or whatever. And I thought what was really interesting is that he peeps through the window. That's where, in the Peeping Tom idea and voyeurism, et cetera, as we've mentioned. And they all see him and they gasp in a sort of 1960s But then what I think is really interesting is what happens next when he goes up to his apartment. He's, if I remember correctly, at this point, he starts watching one of his videos.
Yes,
and then
he goes into his little dark room.
He goes into his little dark room and he starts watching one of his videos where he's murdering, as you do.
As you do.
As you do. And Helen comes upstairs and knocks on the door, and she's got a piece of birthday cake for him. And she doesn't really know, who this man is.
Yeah.
He could be anyone. He could be a serial killer.
Yeah.
Which ironically,
which he is.
But she brings this piece of birthday cake to him, and what again I think is really interesting, she does stuff. She doesn't always.
Yeah, she's
have stuff
proactive.
done to her.
Yeah, you're so right. She pursues him.
She
almost.
pursues him, and I think it's really interesting to see how strong she is.
Mm.
And actually, for all intents and purposes, he's not. Right?
He feels like he just wants to be left alone, doesn't he? Basically,
right? He is quiet.
Yeah.
And he's timid, and she's very enthusiastic, and she wants to know what's going on, and she's obviously an incredibly confident person, and she obviously, as a 21-year-old, she actually looks like she runs her household because her mother is obviously can't do a huge amount. And I just think that the how active she is, especially in comparison with some of the other women in the film, is incredibly interesting.
It is, yeah, it is. And again, ahead of its time, maybe another thing that kind of shocked people at the beginning, the way that she does, it's almost like she kind of covets him and goes after him as well, like she obviously wants him from the beginning. She's the one that keeps going upstairs and knocking on his door constantly.
And if I remember correctly, there is a very handsome gentleman suitor.
There is, who lives opposite.
Yeah, who's chasing after her.
Yes.
And she's having none of it.
No, she's not interested, and she likes the bad ones. She
likes the bad boys.
Yeah, she does. She does. She likes the ones that carry a tripod in their coat when they walk around at night. But yeah, I also find hilarious. Again, it's got that real kind of morality thing where you've got these good characters, quote unquote, that are so posh. I mean, they're like the most clipped English, aren't they? Helen and her mum, and they're all very, oh, hello, Mark, yes, and then the characters that
you talk like that normally.
Yes, I do. And then the characters that get killed, the prostitutes, are all like, it'll cost you £5, mate, and all this, and it's
in the East End of London.
Yeah, it's so extreme, isn't it?
It'll be £2.
It's so interesting, especially even when you just look at the house they're all living in. Like, it's so proper and it's so lovely.
It is.
And then you look at where he spends his time.
Yeah.
Sort of when he is, I think there's one of my favourite scenes in it is when, it's quite near the beginning, when he is taking the photos of the women, and there's I think there's two of these women in this room together. It's obviously some grotty bedsit.
Yes.
It's really messy and it's disgusting. And then what made me really laugh, and what I really loved about it, was then obviously some aid of some kind, or the guy who is controlling all of this whole pornography circuit. Yeah. He brings the set in.
Yes,
for the great pictures, and I think it's just so much. It's so interesting because the set is also just some brick wall.
Some wall, yeah.
But obviously from some grotty club. It looks like something, something out of some grotty club.
It does, yeah.
And so just that whole world is so different to the world that he lives in and that he was brought up in, as you learn later on in the film.
Very kind of well-to-do, isn't he? But yeah, the whole thing, I loved all the scenes in the studio, the film studios, actually. It kind of reminded me of a grotty, seedy version of something like Singing in the Rain from a few years earlier, because you've got this, but especially this one scene where he's with the brilliant Moira Shearer, who plays Vivian, her whole death scene where she's kind of dancing around the studio and he's putting on different lights and there's different sort of bits of set and chest, and it goes on for ages as he's kind of filming her and sort of coveting her for a while before finally murdering her and putting her in a big chest.
Imagine someone coming towards you who wants to kill you, regardless of consequences.
And at that moment when he brings out his weapon. So shall we explain what this weapon is?
Yeah, let's talk about the
weapon.
weapon.
Talking about this weapon, and I mean, don't get me started on phallic imagery. I love a good discussion of phallic imagery, but
there's almost too much to discuss in this movie. Actually, it's like you could go on for hours.
Oh, there's so much you could say about it, and as you say, we're on a podcast. We could keep going. It'd be fantastic. I'm sure we'd lose people.
This nightclub downstairs will be in full swing by the time we're finished.
Just on Peeping Tom.
Yeah.
So this weapon. So you mentioned his tripod.
Yeah.
He carries around this camera with him the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a security blanket, as you later learn in the film.
Yeah.
And rightly so. kills people.
Yes.
So he's got this camera and he's got his tripod, and he when you see the weapon for the first time, it's unveiled, and it's like correct me if I'm wrong, but it's sort of like he slides something off the end of it, off the end of one of the legs, and then he pulls the leg up, so it's pointing forward.
Yes,
in a strictly erect position.
It's amazing. I mean, it literally kind of there's a moment when it's kind of off screen, and then it just kind of like pops up into frame, and it is the most overtly like phallic thing I've ever seen.
Don't get me wrong, like I'm all for subtlety, but this film, there's nothing subtle.
It's brilliantly on the nose. It's amazing.
But I think, but then, you know, as we've said several times, it's the first of its kind. It's obviously Powell was trying to do something.
Yeah.
And you know, subtlety obviously wasn't what he was going for.
And it wasn't. I suppose that's the thing, and we'll probably talk about it in Hitchcock. Psycho has some of these elements too, a bit of phallic imagery, blah blah blah. But I think it's much more subtle, so that you don't. It's not quite, you know, like shoved in your face, so to speak. As Peeping Tom is.
No, and I mean, that's the thing with a slasher. And this is why I think the slasher is so interesting to look at now, because of obviously how the slasher has changed.
Yeah.
And especially in terms of to slash, one needs to have a blade of some form. That is where it's come from. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So obviously a knife, a dagger, a blade of some kind is always going to be very phallic.
Yes.
So it's always, or as I said, traditionally it was a male killer with his blade penetrating a woman. Usually he has some kind of troubles in his own life. Both the men in both these films have their own issues.
I think you know I'd say Mark Lewis has got daddy issues and Norman Bates has got mummy issues, basically.
Exactly. And you know, whether in these two films it's issues with parents, in other films it might be issues with you know, with your penis,
you know,
sexuality, with anything. It could be any of these things.
For anyone who would argue against Peeping Tom being a slasher film, I think we've pretty much laid out that it has every trope in the book, really. It's got the phallic weapon, it's got the stabbing, the slashing, it's got the virginal girl, it's got the promiscuous girl, it's got final girl, it's got the point of view, it's got all of that kind of stuff, the alignment with the killer. So it kind of ticks all the boxes, really. And so I mean, obviously we're both quite big fans by the sounds of it. You were a big fan of the movie, you watched it for the first time recently.
Yeah, exactly.
Loved it. I loved it as well. I think it's amazing. And again, there's like a million more conversations you can have about it, about the way it's I mean, like Martin Scorsese, he cites it as one of his favourite films.
He said it was one of the most influential films of his he's ever seen.
It's a film that was supposed to be distributed in America but never was, and that was the case. And it was something that we were not allowed to see. It was a rumor. They heard about it. We all heard about it. We never saw it. But it's a great idea, we thought. The idea of the compulsion of cinema, the obsession of cinema.
It's one of those films that is, in hindsight, I think everyone respects and loves so much. But at the time, I mean, I've got some good reviews here. So at the time, the film completely bombed with commercial audiences and critical audiences. Derek Hill from the Tribune, this is one of the most famous reviews. He said, the only really satisfactory way to dispose of Peeping Tom would be to shovel it up and flush it swiftly down the nearest sewer. And even then, the stench would remain. The review from The Observer says, it's a long time since a film disgusted me as much as Peeping Tom. I don't propose to name the players in this beastly picture. Like you said, The Spectator said, the sickest and filthiest film I ever remember seeing. The Daily Worker said, from its slumbering, mildly salacious beginning to its appallingly masochistic and depraved climax, this film is wholly evil. I mean, that is extreme.
I'm sold.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd go to that. Exactly. I mean, seriously, I like that last quote. Who said that?
Evil. The Daily
Worker.
And again, these reviews ruin Michael Powell. I mean, this was the guy who gave us the Red Shoes and various other classics from the 50s.
I mean,
and this essentially was like the nail in the coffin of his career. It's so sad.
I did so much reading about him after this film. So like I think if I remember correctly, he had to leave the country.
Yeah.
He made a couple of films and a couple of bits and pieces afterwards, but nothing ever kind of, you know, got obviously to the heights that he was at before.
Yeah.
But I just think I just can't. I would love to speak to someone who was there at the time.
Yeah.
Who was watching this film, and you know, this is not any old filmmaker. This is someone who You talk about the red shoes. You only have to talk about the red shoes in his vast,
huge
filmography to appreciate how important he is.
Yeah. That this isn't some seedy new filmmaker that came out of nowhere.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. This is someone who is established and who is reputable and who people will watch just because it's him.
Yeah.
So I'm so intrigued as to when people saw this and went, oh my God, it's a new Michael Powell film. And they see Peeping Tom.
They thought it was going to be another Red Shoes.
But then the other thing is that there is so much darkness in his other films.
Yes.
It's not like his other films are all, sure, he worked across a variety of genre, but it's not like all of his other films were
squeaky clean.
No.
I mean, you can't objectionally say that this is a badly made film. It's just such a
I mean, take
film.
the thematic things away from it and just look at the pure
craft,
the filmmaking behind it, the way that you mentioned it earlier, the way you're aligned with this character from the very first second.
Yeah.
It's not like it's a ploy to get you in at a certain point. It's not something that the filmmaker's just thrown in, and I'm sure we can think of numerous filmmakers who just use ploys to align you with someone at a certain point to make you feel something. No. This is someone who, from the very opening second of the film, is going, this is it. This is the world we're in. This is who you are with. You are both the voyeur and the criminal. You are the perpetrator,
and that's it. It's just too uncomfortable for people, I guess. That was the thing. And all of his earlier films, like you say, they all have that darkness to them, but I suppose they're hidden within layers, and it's like you could look for it if you want. Whereas this film, you literally see prostitutes being stabbed in the neck by a big phallic blade, and that is, I guess, just too much.
What am I seeing, Mark? Why don't you answer?
So there you go. I mean, obviously, by the sounds of it, a big thumbs up from us.
2 big thumbs up.
Two big
four,
thumbs up.
because there's 4 thumbs in this room right
now. Definitely worth a watch. Now, we're going to move on to Psycho shortly. Now, before we do, I'm going to play a little bit of my chat with Neil Brand. So Neil Brand is, for anyone who doesn't know, he's this incredible kind of film historian / musician who basically is the guy who knows everything when it comes to classic movie making and classic film scores. And obviously a huge part of what we're about to talk about with Psycho, it kind of goes hand in hand with the killings, with the death, with the atmosphere, is Bernard Herman's incredible score and his partnership with Alfred Hitchcock. So I thought this was a really good time to play some of my conversation with the brilliant Neil Brand. Neil, welcome.
Thank you. Very good to be here.
Now, Neil, I am a big fan of yours and of your music, but for anyone who doesn't know, please just tell me a little bit about what you do.
Well, I started life really as a silent film pianist. I was always interested in how music worked with film, and I could always play by ear. And I fell into this very odd specialist job back in the 1980s, and learnt my trade at the National Film Theatre. But then in the last few years, that sort of expanded out to talking about film music in general. And also I write. And I have a kind of crusading zeal about cinema music in particular, because when I was growing up, formal music education basically meant that if you didn't understand music, you weren't supposed to understand what it meant either. Mm-hmm. And the very idea of things like film music was sort of dismissed, almost as being like too accessible in some strange way.
Right.
So part of my kind of ambition of the last 30 years has been to demystify the process of how music's working when it's telling a story. Mainly because it occurred to me quite early on that when a director and a composer sit down together, they are not talking about cadenzas and 3/4 time and symphonic style or any of those things. They're probably talking in terms of colour or emotion or mood. And as such, if all those conversations are taking place in normal language, why can't the conversations about what music is and what it does take place in normal language? So that's really where all that's come from.
Yeah, it's so true. One of my favourite interviews is Angelo Badalamenti talking about when he and David Lynch created the Twin Peaks music together. And that's exactly it, isn't it? You know, David Lynch is just going, there's trees and there's woods and there's, and it's sad and, it's just brilliant. And you're totally right. It's about mood and colour and everything else with film. And I suppose anyone can make interpretations and talk about film music, can't they? That's the thing.
Yeah. But I remember when I interviewed Richard Rodney Bennett, who was one of my all-time heroes as a film composer, he said the hardest directors to work for were the ones who knew anything about music. Because they would almost certainly hit you with something from way off left field.
Right.
You really, I want something that sounds like Bartok at this point. Which actually is deeply unhelpful. It's much more helpful to be told, I need a piece of music that chills at this point, because then you're on common ground. Everybody knows what you're talking about.
Absolutely. And tell me, I'm not very up on sort of silent film accompaniment and how it works, but is it like you have a kind of set piece of music for a certain film, and or is it more that you can kind of take liberties with when you're accompanying a silent movie? Can you sort of go with it?
The beauty of it is that certainly as a piano player, I'm entirely improvising.
Right.
So you improvise.
That's amazing.
Everything.
Yeah.
But you can do it in such a way that people think they're hearing a score. I've, over the years, and this is part of the reason I still do the job, it is so massively enjoyable.
Yeah.
You sit in front of a film, even if it's a film you've not seen before, you start to play and you start to make decisions as you're watching of what this film is, where it's going, who the characters are, what they're going to do. And you begin to shape the music for that unique film in that unique moment. And if you get it right, the film begins to react to the music in a strange way. And the two are absolutely kind of symbiotic. When people watch the film and hear the music, they're not thinking, oh, there's a piano player down there.
No.
They're thinking, I'm enjoying this film and the music's telling me this much and the film's telling me that much. And also when it comes to scoring films, because I've now scored quite a few for orchestra with the BBC Symphony Orchestra, to be absolutely frank, Mike, the best thing about it is the director's dead. You know? You are on your own. There's no one to tell you what to write.
Yeah.
And that is just extraordinary. So, I mean, last year I had this fantastic opportunity to score the original Douglas Fairbanks Robin Hood. 2 hours, 10 minutes.
Wonderful.
Of fantastic, fast-moving, swashbuckling stuff with a full orchestra. I think we had over 100 players eventually. And you can be Korngold, you can be Bernard Herman, you can be John Williams, you can be Danny Elfman, you can be all those people you want to be.
That's brilliant.
To actually just support this extraordinary filmmaker. And, and there's Doug climbing up castle walls and swinging around all over the place and doing sword fights. Nothing more enjoyable than doing something like that. Without drawing on any particular original music, but drawing like mad on original film composers who I admire.
Wonderful. So let's talk a little bit about the horror genre. Actually, first of all, what's your relationship like with the horror genre? Are you a fan of horror movies?
I'm way too much of a wimp to be able to really enjoy horror movies. I find it really uncomfortable to sit waiting for that next jolt because I think I'm just way too susceptible. I can't go and enjoy it much as I would love to. Having said that, I've seen quite a lot of horror, and certainly as far as the genre is concerned and the music's concerned, it is fascinating how the music is used under those circumstances and what approaches you can make, because there are probably more musical approaches to horror than there are to many other genres. Yeah. Because horror in itself obviously splits off into subdivisions.
It's so broad, yeah.
It really is. Certainly, the process of the history of scoring horror is fascinating. I mean, I was a huge fan of all the very early Universal horrors. I loved the Hammer horrors, because as Peter Cushing said, they're fairy stories.
Yeah,
really, and so I grew up with that being my idea of what was terrifying, was Hammer. Yeah, we've moved on so far.
We have, yeah.
That now just feels like baby steps in horror movies, you know. I mean, it's Psycho now feels like the great grandfather of every other horror film.
It does. I know.
It's a long time ago.
I mean, what if we go all the way back to the beginning, to the silent movies like Nosferatu, for example? I mean, how would you define, I suppose, the characteristics of a horror score, or how would you accompany a movie like Nosferatu?
In terms of all horror, I mean, I have heard the original score that was written for Nosferatu, and I have to say it's terribly polite, very classical.
Is it? Yeah.
But the thing about horror sound is that 9 times out of 10, I think what you're hearing is much more frightening than what you're seeing.
Yes.
And in my case, I can trace that back to the fact that when I was a kid and I was watching something that might scare me, I didn't put my hands over my eyes, I put my fingers in my ears.
Yeah.
Because somehow or other you could imagine the worst thing you could see, but you couldn't imagine the worst thing you could hear.
Yeah.
And you still see that with kids now, that, you know, they're watching something, and as they start to get a bit tense, they bring their knees up under their chins, and then they stick their fingers in their ears. And it is like kind of, you know, oh! So for Nosferatu, I would do what I think all music for horror attempts to do, which is to put the audience into a place where they don't feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, when Hammer came to score their movies, they decided, I think, very shrewdly to go for the idea of atonal music being what would make people feel uncomfortable. And, of course, the great James Bernard was the finest of all the composers for Hammer and did most of their work. And he would spell out the titles of the films in what he was doing. So Dracula was always Jum, ba-dum.
Yes.
And then Taste the Blood of Dracula, if I remember right, it was something like dum, bum, 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 ba-dum. So there is a kind of sense that the world is out of joint as soon as you hear that music start. And in James Bernard's case, the music was usually furious and building, and this oncoming rush of absolute and utter evil, which unfortunately kind of blows itself out quite quickly. That's my problem with James Bernard, is that if you're not careful, that's all you get.
It hasn't got anywhere more to go.
It's got nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes not dissimilar to someone yelling in your ear, God, this is frightening, isn't it? This is so frightening.
1960, then you've got Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. What sort of changed then at that point, then, would you say, in terms of horror scores and horror music?
I think what Herman pulled off very specifically with that shower scene, and what no one had really had the guts to do before, was to not make the music about the horror of the moment, just to make it about the practical sounds of the moment. Now, there's always been this suggestion that Hitchcock didn't want to score the shower scene, and that somehow or other Herman scored it on the quiet and then played it to Hitchcock, and Hitchcock loved it. Well, if you unpack that idea, that means that Hitchcock was all set to make the shower scene with ordinary sound. Well, I'm sorry, but the sound of a human body being pierced with a knife again and again and again and again and again would have been absolutely unrateable in terms of what the censor would have done.
Yes.
No way that could happen. I think it's probably much more likely that Hitchcock knew that. And also because I think Saul Bass was obviously involved in that sequence somewhere along the lines as well. There's so much Saul Bass style of imagery in there.
Yeah.
And Bass's big kind of modus operandi when he was doing opening title sequences was he'd be working very closely with the composer. So if we come back to it now as what Bernard Herman does, that sense of the stabbing string chords getting deeper and deeper, as in the chord gets thicker. He adds in more and more bass end of strings. So it starts with just the first violins, then it's the first and seconds, then it's the first seconds of violas, then it's the first second violas, cellos, then it's the first second violas, cellos and basses.
Yeah.
So there is this horrible sense of kind of something going deeper and deeper and deeper. That is chilling enough on its own, but it's not going, oh, how awful this is happening.
No.
It's not going, help, help, get me out of here. It's not doing any of those things. It's making the sound of a knife, end of. And I think that is a kind of new brutalism in horror movies. Up till then, the music would have somehow or other reflected either our sense of horror at what we were watching, or Janet Leigh's sense of horror at what she was going through. And this doesn't. It's one of the things about Herman, which you notice, is that he is a cold composer. The music for Vertigo is fantastically romantic.
Yeah.
But most of his music doesn't have that warmth. It doesn't have that depth of humanity.
Yeah.
It is fantastic sounding. It works a treat. It really does represent the mood or the mise en scène or whatever it is he's supposed to be scoring. But there's not an awful lot of humanity there.
No.
And in the shower sequence, there is precisely none. That is a mincing machine that he's composed there. And I think that's what flips the coin. The Hammer horrors, you see, are all about the horror. Literally, the music is telling you the emotion. He's absolutely not. And, the fact that he uses only a string section for that film is in and of itself a very kind of deliberate attempt. So you've got no horns, you've got no woodwinds, you've got no percussion. You've only got this cold and quite stark use of an orchestra as a single instrument. Yeah. Doing what it does. So that fantastic sequence with the car trip and the windscreen wipers going, and that beautiful piece that he writes for that. Well, even there, some of those little high movement is kind of not really giving any emotion to that sequence at all. It's kind of, and actually Hitchcock has loads of time go by of Janet Leigh driving with no music at all. Yeah. And with no sense of anything except what's going on back where she's left, where they're going, hang on, why haven't we found this money? Where has she gone? What do you mean she's left in a car? Yes. Blah, blah. There's no sense that we are being drawn to as attracted to her. Yes. Or wanting her to get away with it, or wanting her to be caught even. It's completely left open as to whether or not she's a good person, bad person, or whatever. And when she dies, the music does the same thing. It does not call upon us to pity her death.
No. And yet somehow it's so tense that all that sequence in the car when she's driving is I suppose the problem is with the shower scene is that everyone knows it with their eyes closed. And actually now upon rewatch, I find everything leading up to the shower scene more scary and much suspenseful when she's driving in the rain and when she stops to swap cars and all that. Yeah. It's just fantastically done. But you're right, it is. And I suppose that's the thing about that whole film, after the death and we're suddenly following Norman and we don't quite know how we feel about any of these characters, do we, I suppose? So it has to have that ambiguity.
Yeah. Psycho is Hitchcock's greatest outing as a manipulator.
Yes, totally.
People. He is uncaringly moving these pieces around his chessboard. And he doesn't give a toss about anything except making sure the audience are on the back foot the whole time and get these shocks when they come. Yeah. And we're not really that fussed about who gets killed and who doesn't, except towards the very end when it would be really nice if somebody survived the whole business and somebody we liked would be even better. And it is a surprise when you get Norman Bates as the mum, and then there's this great long explanation afterwards when you really don't need.
It's a brilliant moment of exposition. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So so he was a fruitcake and he was 6 minutes on white. But you can tell that Hitch was just loving being able to use a TV crew to, like I say, play as God.
Yeah.
With a chessboard.
Yeah.
And Bernard Herman gave him precisely the score he needed for that. So you don't have an emotional attachment to those people. And maybe that is where the horror movie grows up.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the point at which, you know, we cared pretty deeply about the characters in the Spiral Staircase, or about some of the characters in the Hammer Horrors, and certainly the characters in the Universal Horrors. There was a sense that you were rooting for someone.
Yeah.
Quite often rooting for the guy who was the monster, you know, Lon Chaney Jr. or whatever. But after Psycho, it's like you don't have to. You don't have to care anymore.
No.
Just watch what is going to happen to these people. And I suppose, thank God, it's not you. You know, maybe that's the ultimate thing, that, you know, vicariously you go through hell with somebody else and just think, well, you know, that goes. Which I can only assume, and I'm really not a fan of torture porn.
No.
But, you know, I assume that is what is great about Saw for those who like Saw.
Yeah.
Is that you kind of are amazed and sort of delightedly disgusted with what can be done to human beings in terms of putting them through hell. And then you can go off and have an Indian and go home to bed.
Yeah, so true. And I guess that's why a lot of the time people cite Psycho as one of the forerunners of the sort of slasher. I mean, apart from the fact that it's got somebody being slashed with a knife, but it grows into that format with things like Friday the 13th and Halloween, where you're just watching it for the body count, basically, not for anything else.
Absolutely so.
Yeah.
Absolutely so. With a film like Halloween, where you have such a cold, chillingly cold score by John Carpenter for his own film. There again, that music is both freezing cold and inevitable. I love it. I mean, I love Carpenter stuff, and I really, really hope that he is going to be scoring this new Halloween that's going to be coming out. But as you say, it's a body count. You're just watching the ducks go down as each shot happens.
Yeah.
And how it's going to happen. And yeah, with a film like Final Destination, for goodness sake, you know, that is all there is. Ultimately, you know, this lot are all going to be for the chop. It's just a question of how.
Yeah.
So I don't think any other of the great composers of the golden age of Hollywood could possibly have scored Psycho the way Bernard Herman did, because Herman had a slightly terrifying ability to step back from the humanity of any situation and just score the mechanics. And that's kind of what Carpenter's done. That's certainly what, you know, many horror film scores these days do, is this drip of sensibility within the music.
Neil, thank you so much for joining me. Just for people out there that might want to know, I mean, where can people find information about you, about, you know, upcoming projects, events, that kind of thing?
Well, I have a website, which is www.neilbrand.com. And I tried to put all my forthcoming stuff on there.
Great.
As far as silent film's concerned, there's a very good website called Silent London, which has got most of what's going on in London and around. And also, if you're interested in the mechanics of film music, I have a YouTube channel called Neil Brand's Bells and Whistles, which gets updated from time to time.
Yes.
But I try and put new stuff on there where I can. And I try and answer people's questions. If you've got something specific on your mind, I'm on Twitter, Neil K. Brand, or Facebook. Fire it at me, and if it's at all possible for me to make some kind of response, I will.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Cheers, Mike.
And there we have it, the ridiculously talented and incredibly lovely Neil Brand. Now, that is just a mere snippet of my chat with Neil. We actually went into everything, into the history of horror music, sort of through the Hammer phase, through Hitchcock, into sort of the 1970s music from Giallo and Tubular Bells, the music from The Shining, all the way through to sort of modern masterpieces like Under the Skin. So if you want to hear my full chat with Neil, it will be released as a bonus episode over the next few days, so keep a lookout. Please do subscribe on iTunes, then you'll be the first to hear about it as soon as it is released early on next week. Okay, well, I think now this feels like a perfect time to go into our review of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. So this came out in 1960, literally a matter of months after Peeping Tom. Peeping Tom was this gigantic flop, and then we've got the new film by, at the time, the absolute beloved Alfred Hitchcock. So he had previously, I think the year before this, he had done North by Northwest, before that Vertigo. He'd had this run of huge hits through the 50s, but all of them were, I guess, thrillers, mysteries, comedies, all these different types of genres, never really dabbled in proper horror, I suppose. And then this movie came along, and, you know, famously he revealed so little about the movie. He told cinemas not to let people in if they missed the beginning. You weren't allowed to come in late. You had to watch it from the beginning. You weren't allowed to know any of what happened. You weren't allowed to talk to other people about what happened. So a lot of audiences went in to watch a movie of what they thought was Marion Crane, played by Janet Leigh, who stole some money from her boss and then went on the run. And, you know, will she or will she not get away with it? But obviously that is not what the movie turns out to be at all. So I'll quickly run through the plot of Psycho. That's essentially it. She goes on the run with some money. She thinks she's going to get away with it. She's got these plans to kind of leave her job, go and find her boyfriend and sort of start a new life. She comes kind of guilt-ridden on this drive. The weather gets horrible. It's pouring with rain. It's a storm. She pulls over to find the nearest motel, basically, and that motel happens to be the Bates Motel. She stays there the night. She meets Norman, the very friendly, seemingly innocent motel manager, and then, as she takes a shower, she is stabbed to death by Mrs. Bates, or what we soon discover is Norman Bates in a wig. And spoiler alert. And this is about the midway point in the movie, and then this is where you're like, okay, now what the hell's happening? Because our main protagonist has just been murdered, and suddenly the movie completely switches, and now we're aligned with Norman Bates and not Janet Leigh, and we're now following the rest of the story as people try and figure out what happened to Marion Crane, and as Norman Bates tries to cover it all up, basically. So everyone knows the story, you know, everyone must have seen this movie. Everyone has at least seen all those iconic moments, heard all the iconic lines. You know, it's got to be probably the most iconic horror movie ever, I would say. So you had already seen this film before, had you?
Yes.
And generally then, a fan of the film?
Yeah, I mean, you can't not love it.
No.
You can't not love Psycho. You can't not love Hitchcock.
Yeah, totally.
You know, it's just in your blood. I think it's just in your blood if you're a human being.
Yeah, if you're in any way a film fan, definitely.
Yeah, you can't get away from how iconic it is, and for all the reasons you mentioned and more.
Yeah.
You know, for having the gumption to kill your main character halfway through the film, which, you know, nowadays, actually when I say nowadays, it still doesn't happen regularly.
No.
And it does happen sometimes. I'm trying to think off the top of my head.
Well,
for example.
a good example in a slasher genre would be Scream, where you've got Drew Barrymore, and she doesn't die halfway through, but when Scream was first released, she was the top billed star. She was the only really famous face in the film. Yeah. Everyone thought this was Drew Barrymore's movie, and then she is brutally murdered and hung from a tree after 15 minutes. And again, Scream obviously paid tribute to so many old slasher films, and I'm sure that was partly a tribute to Psychos, that you kill off your main star midway through.
They have the same kind of look, actually.
That kind of
Janet
short
Leigh
blonde.
and Drew Barrymore.
I
never thought about it before.
Yeah, it's definitely a tribute. You've also got a character called Sam Loomis in Psycho, and you've got Billy Loomis in Scream. You've got a lot of...
I mean, Scream is, you know, it's going to be rife with that stuff, isn't it?
Full of references to Psycho. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know where to start really with this, but, you know, do you think... I suppose, like, one of the things that I was thinking about when I rewatched this is that the film is so iconic. The film is so well known now that do you think anyone can still get the same enjoyment out of Psycho as, you know, audiences would have back in the 60s when you really didn't know what to expect? I mean, everyone has seen that shower scene. Everyone watches that film knowing that Janet Leigh is going to die. Is it still enjoyable if you know all that?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think. Yes. No, yes. I'm going to go in confidently on this. Yes. It is, because the film is, like Peeping Tom, incredibly made. You know, you can't get away from the fact that this, you know, that Hitchcock is the top of his game. He understands the craft. He understands how to make a film. He understands how to tell a story. Yeah. You know, I think you're right. Everyone knows what happens. It's not a surprise. It's not a secret. It's like The Sixth Sense. Everyone knows. I've not even seen The Sixth Sense because someone ruined it for me.
Okay.
Because
There's no point. Yeah.
You know, well, this is the thing. You know it.
Yeah.
But I think that with Psycho, there is so much more to it, and it's in that second half.
Yes.
You know, don't get me wrong. It's all. I love watching Janet Leigh doing what she does in it, and it's fabulous. And
she is. That's the one thing that does make me a bit sad, is that she is the best, most interesting person in the film, actually. And
100%.
when her sister, Lila Crane, played by Vera Miles, comes into it and is suddenly our sort of new protagonist, she's not quite as interesting, is she, somehow, as Janet Leigh?
No, I mean, Janet Leigh is Janet Leigh. I mean, there's a, just slightly off from this, but still connected to Psycho, in which is the Halloween film. It must be H2O.
Yeah.
We were talking about this, weren't we? Did we talk
we?
about H2O at Fright Fest?
Possibly,
I was talking to
yeah,
someone
yeah.
about it recently, where it has Janet Leigh in, I think, one of her last ever roles.
Yes.
And she's obviously playing Jamie Lee Curtis's... it's the secretary,
yes,
isn't it? It's the secretary, and she's the dean or something of the college.
That's
or something.
right. Yeah.
And she drives. The last time you see her, she drives off in the psycho car, and you're just like, I just love that nod.
It's so brilliant.
It's so iconic.
Is.
It's so iconic, and that's I think for me one of the big differences between these two films that we're talking about is that Peeping Tom now has a cult appreciation.
Yes.
Now is understood and is examined and is, appreciated. Whereas Psycho, you can't get away from a film. I don't know. You can't get away from a film like Citizen Kane. You can't get away from a film like Casablanca.
Yeah.
You can't get away from Rebel Without a Cause. These are films that are in the public consciousness.
Yes.
If you know cinema, if you appreciate cinema, Psycho is at the head of them. If you appreciate horror, it's Psycho, it's The Shining, it's Halloween. These are just films that are a given.
Yeah.
And that's what Psycho, that's for me one of the big differences between the two films. And that might be for many reasons. I think the thing with Psycho, as we touched upon earlier, is that it's so I don't think it's dated.
No, it's not. It's
so clean.
It is. The filmmaking is just so brilliant, and it really feels like you're watching about 3 different films as it goes on. That's what I really love about it, is that the way it just twists and turns. It's like you said with Peeping Tom. It's like from the get-go, you know what you're in for. It is what it is from the opening scene. Psycho is the opposite to that. It's like you have no idea what this film is, what this story is, who the characters are that you're aligned with. And again, it's that strange thing of you actually essentially are end up aligned with Norman Bates really more than anyone else, because from that moment when she's killed in the shower, suddenly you see Norman and he discovers the body, and we watch for ages, and it's a long sequence where he wraps up the body and he disposes of the blood and he flushes stuff down the toilet
and he
pushes the car into the swamp, and
he's sad. He's emotional.
Because of course at that point we're not supposed to think he is the murderer. We're supposed to think he's the son of the murderer.
You don't know, and he's trying to cover up for his mother, and he's trying to whatever. You care about Norman, which is peculiar when you think about it in the end, but you care. Whereas with Peeping Tom, there's no. You care insofar as you're aligned with him, but you know he is. You're uncomfortable. You know he is the killer. There is no conversation, there's no suspense around that. There's suspense in other ways.
And again with Peeping Tom, it's a little bit more difficult to decipher exactly what his issues are, aren't there? Whereas Psycho, you literally have this monologue at the end by this psychologist that lays it all out, and it feels like it's so much more made for a mainstream audience, isn't it? Psycho is a popcorn movie where it's like, okay,
we've got a bit of exposition.
We have got some weird stuff here. We've got some slightly strange psychological stuff going on for 1960, but we're going to lay it all out to you very clearly and say this is weird, rather than let you kind of make up your own mind like with Peeping Tom.
And also, let's not get away from the fact that everyone's got interesting relationships with their mothers.
Oh yeah.
I mean, this film is mother issues.
It's brilliant. How good is that scene when they're talking in the office in the motel with all the stuffed birds everywhere? And it's just a brilliantly played out scene where, it starts off very friendly and he makes her a sandwich and he sounds a bit nervous and he tells all about his mother problems, and then she starts to get a bit freaked out by him, and then he starts to get a bit angry and defensive, and the way the conversation suddenly turns is really great. And, Anthony Perkins is really good in this as well. He's really good.
I mean, performance of a lifetime.
Surely.
It's not as if she were a maniac, a raving thing. She just goes a little mad sometimes. We all go a little mad sometimes.
This is one of the reasons we remember Anthony Perkins is this role of Norman Bates. There's there's no, getting away from that.
No. And again, whether or not it had a good influence or a bad, because, he said that after this film, he could never escape Norman Bates. He couldn't get other roles anymore. And,
Didn't he play Norman Bates again?
Yes, I think
several
more
times. No?
Yeah, I think there was Psycho 2 was about 20 years later, and that's just got an Arrow re-release, actually. Yes. And it's actually really worth a watch. And then Psycho 3 came a few years after that. Yeah, he basically couldn't escape Norman Bates after that. But, I suppose you wouldn't with such an iconic movie, such an iconic role. But he is excellent in it. He's so good, because the way that your feelings about him change throughout the movie is brilliant. The way that Alfred Hitchcock just plays with our expectations and perspectives and stuff throughout is just brilliant.
Well, this is the thing with this film, isn't it? It's we quite often cite that some of the best films are the ones that don't necessarily follow audience expectation.
Yeah,
and I think the ones that guide you into a false sense of security. What you're watching. Oh wait, we're going to pull the carpet out from under you.
Yeah,
the rug out from under you.
Yeah,
pull the carpet. You're putting
the whole carpet. That's how big a deal it is.
I mean, seriously,
yeah.
Wow. But that's the thing, isn't it? Is that it's you never know where you're going to go next.
No,
with this film.
And that's the only thing, isn't it? Because, like I said on my first question, now you kind of do know where you're going next, and
there's a formula.
Is that one element of the fun of this film that's now gone for pretty much most audiences that will ever watch it again? Because everyone knows what this film is. Everyone knows about that shower scene, so you kind of feel that it's inevitably coming at some point.
I really want to. I'm sitting here listening to you, and I'm staring into space, trying to think of a way to come back at what you're saying, because I want to try and think of a way where that's not true, but it probably is.
But I'm not. Yeah, exactly. And I'm not saying it in it doesn't lessen my enjoyment of the movie, no matter how many times I watch it. To be honest, but I just think, God, how exciting would it be if you were some person that lived underground your whole life and then watched this movie knowing nothing of what was coming? Because it is, it's crazy the twists and turns that it takes. But yeah, who knows?
Can we talk about the shower scene?
Let's talk about the shower scene. Yeah, I suppose we keep scooting over it, but we should talk about it. The stabbing scene in the shower is reported to have taken 7 days to shoot, using 70 different camera angles, even though the entire sequence lasts, I think, something around 45 seconds. It's just incredible.
It's so powerful,
yeah,
and it's so memorable, and it's the thing that changes the direction of the film.
Yeah,
it's I remember learning about the 3-act structure of storytelling, and you get to the point where the shower scene is, and that's the point. It's about the midpoint of the film where you would expect it to go. You expect to know sort of what the main character's journey is, what their needs are, and what they now need to do to reach their climax of the story. And suddenly she's dead.
Yes, and that's it. It's not just a brilliant scene. It's like such an important scene in the film and in cinema, because it's like suddenly it stops you in your tracks and it completely changes everything.
Where's the film going to go?
Yeah.
Our main character's dead. What are we about to do? I mean...
It's amazing. And, again, anyone who's probably studied film or knows about Hitchcock hears about this theory about tension versus surprise versus suspense and the bomb under the table thing, where, Alfred Hitchcock famously said, if you've got a bomb under a table, show your audience that it's there, rather than, have it go off as a surprise, because it's much more suspenseful to know what characters don't know. And again, he kind of uses both in this, because you've got the surprise of, oh my God, Janet Leigh's being stabbed to death, which is a genuinely jumpy moment because of the music and everything. And then from that point onwards, it's like we all know what all the other characters don't, which is that there's a body in the swamp, and that everyone else is creeping around, and oh my God, they're all in danger walking around this house because one of them could get stabbed to death by Mrs. Bates at any moment, which is what happens to the police detective, which I think is an equally as good scary moment, I think, as well, when he gets stabbed at the top of the stairs.
I'm also really intrigued with both these films, but just we touched on it a little bit with Peeping Tom in terms of the representation of women.
Yeah.
And I think again both these films are very interesting in their representation of gender for both men and women. The way that the softness of Norman Bates, he's not Michael Myers.
No, he's kind of like, you want to use the word impotent almost about him, don't you?
Yeah. That's the same word that you would use for Mark.
Yeah,
in
totally.
Peeping Tom.
Yeah.
It's it's there is, to both men, there is a softness.
Yeah.
There is a feeling of emasculation.
Yeah, kind of naivety.
Yeah. And I think that's very interesting. They're not macho men.
No.
And I mentioned Michael Myers, just one of the ones that comes into my head, but they're not running around. They're not active.
No.
They're not running around stabby stab.
No.
They're much colder.
Yeah. I mean, with Norman Bates, he's just this guy who just, it's people that come to him. It's not him, venturing into people's homes.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees or whatever. It's people that are literally coming into his house, or and then he's doing what he's got to do. But yeah, it is really interesting. There's, I'm sure, psychology kind of stuff you could talk about for hours when it comes to these two characters. Definitely, obviously, the fact that he is a transvestite, Norman Bates, all this other stuff.
Yeah, I think, and also, and not just with the men, but then with the women as well.
Yeah,
we spoke about Helen and Peeping Tom, but again, with Marion and Psycho, in the first half, she's active.
Yeah.
She has stolen the money.
Yeah,
she is the one that goes on the road. Goes on the journey. And I think that's really interesting.
Absolutely, and she's so independent. And the opening scene as well, I read, was again quite shocking and provocative at the time. I mean, obviously not compared to Peeping Tom, but for a mainstream movie where it starts with her in her bra, on the bed with her boyfriend, and they're kind of either post-coital or whatever. And again, voyeurism. You could talk about voyeurism to death with these movies, but obviously, like Psycho, literally opens with Hitchcock's camera creeping in through a kind of in the gap in the blinds into her apartment as she's on her bed in her bra.
I better get back to the office. These extended lunch hours give my boss excess acid.
So gender and sexuality in representation of those two things are very interesting to me, particularly. So
massively.
These two films
are
obviously really interesting films to look at and go, okay, well, there are very many comments that are being made here. And I'm trying to think, I'm sure that there are horror films that are made today, and there of course there are horror films that are still doing those sorts of things in terms of gender representation, in terms of changing the final girl. I thought there was a very interesting, again, I keep mentioning Fright Fest this year just because it's
just happened.
It's just happened, isn't it? It's recent in our minds. So this film, 68 Kill, which again, like, I really massively highly recommend it when it comes out. It's absolutely bloody fantastic. But again, like, what I loved about that was that it flips the final girl, because the final girl is not a final girl, it's the final boy. And obviously we've seen that quite a few times throughout the slasher as well, that people have tried to do that. Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2.
Yeah,
is it Part 2, isn't it? That's the one where again, you've got the final boy.
Yes.
And I think that's all quite. It's interesting to see how filmmakers and writers over the years have tried to evolve those conversations.
Yeah, totally.
I don't know whether to how much extent they've succeeded in, and covered as much ground as these two films did at the start of this.
Yeah, I mean, people have literally been writing books on these films for 50 years now, haven't they? And you feel like you can't ever scratch the surface of them. And it's just amazing that they both share so many themes, and they both came out in the same year, months apart, and they had the complete opposite reactions. But they're so similar in so many ways.
And yet there must have been, good films, as we have decided these two are.
Yes.
Quite often pick on the public's consciousness. They pick something up in the consciousness of how the world is feeling.
Yeah.
So there must have been something in the public consciousness that, both Hitchcock in America was feeling when he made Psycho, and Psycho's based on a book.
Yes. And also, actually, we should mention as well Ed Gein, or Ed Gein, however you pronounce his name, who was this real-life serial killer that lived in a farmhouse.
The Butcher of Plainfield.
That's it, the Butcher of Plainfield. Yeah, and like when you hear about Ed Gein, you think of about a million different horror movies, and he's been the inspiration for so many. He's this guy lived on his own in the middle of America, in the middle of nowhere. He dressed up like his mother. He was a transvestite. He killed people. He ate them. He skinned them. He wore their skins.
He excavated corpses.
Yes.
And he used them to decorate his house.
Yeah, he had lampshades made of skin. And
a million things here. There was a picture when I looked him up earlier that reminded me exactly of Michael Myers' mask.
Yeah.
which is using the skin that he made to create masks.
Yeah.
And, just from your description of him, Buffalo Bill,
a big one. Buffalo Bill, Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Michael Myers, 100 million different horror movies, but also Norman Bates, crucially.
100%. And that's the same period of time.
Yeah.
The novel, if I remember correctly, came out for Psycho.
Yeah. And this was a big news story in America. And again, it was a shocking thing, I think, for people then who lived in this 50s conservative America that were like, wow, there are these people that exist that live out in these houses and get up to all kinds of stuff that we don't know about. And again, that's kind of suddenly opened the door, I guess, to all these types of movies.
A man who dresses in women's clothing in order to achieve a sexual change or satisfaction is a transvestite. But in Norman's case, he was simply doing everything possible to keep alive the illusion of his mother being alive.
So Psycho, the reception to Psycho was obviously huge. You had people queuing around the blocks in cinemas, because they all wanted to find out what it was, and everyone said you've got to go see it, and it was a word of mouth thing. And
that marketing campaign. I mean, that is you can't look back at historic marketing campaigns. I mean, Hitchcock, full stop.
Yeah, it was just amazing.
Hitchcock knew what he was doing. He knew how to work with film companies. Film companies knew how to work with him. There was an understanding. I don't think there are many directors today that still work in the same way that Hitchcock worked. I think if you look at a marketing campaign of someone completely random for horror, but Pedro Almodovar, he is in so much control of his marketing campaigns the same way Hitchcock was.
That's interesting.
In terms, he knows every element of every word that's being written, that's being said. And Hitchcock was the same in terms of you look at, he talks to the audience directly, Hitchcock.
How good. I mean, I wish all directors still did trailers like Hitchcock did, where a Hitchcock just, where the director would just talk to the camera and talk to the audience about what his film is, but not show any clips, just kind of wander about and talk a little bit about it.
It's nothing, isn't it? He's chilled out.
But also Hitchcock was such a showman as well. Like, a lot of directors probably wouldn't be able to do it as well. That's the problem.
Of course, he with his cameo in every single film.
Yeah, it's amazing.
You just can't. We're going to geek out about Hitchcock now.
Yeah, I love the trailer for Psycho when he's like, "Oh, come into the bathroom and this is where it all happened." And it's just brilliant.
Well, the murderer, you see, crept in here very slowly. Of course, the shower was on. There was no sound, and.
Going back to slashers then, look at Peeping Tom, and we talked about how Peeping Tom has so many of the slasher elements. It pretty much ticks every slasher box. I don't know whether Psycho does as much, actually, weirdly. And again, Psycho has a reputation for being maybe a bit of a forerunner for the slasher genre. Psycho, I don't think you've got quite as obviously, the final girl thing, the blah, 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 all these other kind of boxes.
It's a bit controversial, but I think Peeping Tom is probably more. I feel like we've hit more of the tropes as we've spoken about it today. I just, don't get me wrong, Psycho obviously incredibly important to the genre, the slasher genre, but I don't know, there's just something about Peeping Tom actually now we talk about it that's like, oh wait,
it's much more a horror film, and also horror.
It's much more a horror film.
As horror fans and Fright Fest attendees, we're used to films that make most of the rest of the public feel a bit sick or uncomfortable, and that's what horror is. It's like, most people don't like it, most people hated it, but you can get it in these like dingy underground, DVD shops or whatever, and that's what Peeping Tom is. And Psycho wasn't that. Psycho was this big crowd
clean, and it's Hollywood, and it's blockbuster, and that's probably, let's be frank about it, the reason why it has the appeal it has. The reason why it's as long-standing classic that it is. The reason Peeping Tom is underground still and cult, and cult is has both positive and negative connotation. I'm sure both of us, I'm sure most people that you're talking to on this podcast and most people that listen to this podcast think cult is cool, because cult is cool, but also not all filmmakers, I'm sure, want to be cult. They want to be breakout. They want to be blockbuster.
Totally.
Which is not what cult is.
No.
So that's the thing with Psycho, is that it's almost the opposite of what Peeping Tom is.
Yeah. My mum will have seen Psycho. My mum won't have seen Peeping Tom, for example. My grandmother would have seen Psycho, but not Peeping Tom.
I remember one of my earliest memories of talking about Hitchcock and Psycho is my granddad. and I can't. It was specifically Psycho he was talking about, and this was when I was probably a teenager and first starting to discover Hitchcock and my love for film and all that. And I think I had probably just bought this DVD box set that we talked about.
Yeah.
And I was definitely I definitely watched Psycho before I got into horror. I definitely watched Psycho as a teenager, just when I was learning about the history of cinema. And I must have told my granddad, and I saw like a physical shudder. like oh no, I couldn't watch that again. Like that kept me up at night.
It really scared mainstream audiences, and of course it would. It is still scary, it is still jumpy. I mean, actually, that's the one thing we haven't actually talked about. Did either of these movies scare you? Peeping Tom, Psycho? No. I mean, is that just because you're now a jaded horror fan who's seen everything?
I think Peeping Tom and Psycho maybe not scary, but they make you ask a lot of questions about, like, I don't know, being a person. I'm trying not to get too deep and philosophical on this, but and I think that's scary.
I think they don't make me jump or anything like that anymore, but both movies do. When I rewatched them, I was surprised at how much I did still get into them. I was still like, oh,
you're uncomfortable.
Yeah, you know, and I like the fact that I think the film's done well, the films are written well, the characters are written well, so therefore you do genuinely care about them. I genuinely, probably more so Peeping Tom, because you care about Janet Leigh when she's dead, and actually I didn't care so much about all the characters that were left. You cared more about Norman Bates by that point. Whereas Peeping Tom, I did actually care about what's her name? Helen. Sorry, I did actually care about Helen the whole way through. She was this lovely, sweet, innocent person, and her mum, where I kind of actually the moment when her mum gets cornered up against a wall, I genuinely found myself going, oh my god, I don't want her to die. You know,
I genuinely believe, and I completely agree with you, that with Peeping Tom, Mark, when you're explained what has happened to him in his life, and you're watching those videos of him as a child, and you're watching what, for all intents and purposes, is child abuse. Let's not bugger about with it. It's child abuse. It's so incredible how compelled you are to his character, and you do care.
Yeah, totally.
100% you care.
Yeah. It's great. I mean, and that's the thing. It depends what you mean by scared, doesn't it? But I guess I was into the movies to a point where I cared what happened to the characters and
to the killers,
as well. The killers and the victims. So I suppose I felt the suspense. I wasn't scared, but I felt the suspense still. And I think that's an amazing thing for movies that are like 50, 60 years old, which is, a good thing.
100%.
Okay. Well, if you had to pick one that was your favourite
between these two,
Peeping Tom, if you had to pick one to it's too hard, isn't it? Because they're both brilliant in different ways.
Don't know. I think I preferred Peeping Tom, but I don't know whether that's a bit too controversial.
I think as a horror film, Peeping Tom, I think that's true. And also, you're always going to want to recommend the smaller movie more sometimes, aren't you? That's the thing.
Proper film,
proper cult film fans.
Yeah, we don't want to talk about the big Hollywood.
the big glossy ones. Yeah, that's it. But both absolutely incredible.
I mean,
movies.
they're both.
This is probably the only time on this podcast where I'm going to be talking about two films that are both as brilliant as these movies. In all these various ways that we've discussed for 2 hours. So we should probably wrap it up soon. Before we go, I'm going to ask you a few quick on-the-spot questions that we ask everyone.
Christ.
You're going to struggle with these probably by the sounds of it. But okay, what is your favourite horror movie?
No idea.
If you had to narrow it down to 2 or 3 even.
The only ones that are coming to my head right now, I love Halloween. I love Nightmare. I love Nightmare on Elm Street.
So you are a slasher fan.
Yeah. I mean, I love Nightmare on Elm Street. I think the whole series, except maybe number 2, unfortunately. I think is amazing. I think New Nightmare is just one of the best films ever made. But then I can't get enough of the Babadook. I think the Babadook just that film that was scary. I don't know what my favourite is.
Fair enough.
There are too many.
Fair enough. Good choices though. And what was your first horror movie? Do you remember? other than Psycho, I suppose, when you were young.
This is the first actual memory of me sitting down and watching a horror film. Because I probably didn't think Psycho was when I watched it. This is what I can remember at least, and I think it is. I think it's true. And I can't remember if I told you this story before. So it's embarrassing that I'm telling it on a podcast where some people might hear it, but alas, these things happen.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was Naomi Watts' remake of The Ring.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh, that's not that bad.
No,
That's not
no.
shameful.
But I'll tell you the story.
Oh, okay.
So this was obviously came out a long time ago, and I was still at school, and this was at the point where I wasn't watching horror films, scared of my own shadow.
Right.
Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, so I was at my best friend's house. He said, "We're going to watch The Ring," and I was like, "No, I don't want to watch The Ring. I get scared of it." "You're going to watch The Ring. You have to watch The Ring." I was like, "Okay, fine. We're going to watch The Ring." So I was sat in a chair, and he was sat on a sofa behind me. Mm-hmm. And we were watching it on a TV screen, and the very first time that the videotape is watched in the film, it comes up on the screen, you watch it with the characters, that's all fine. Yeah. And then the phone starts ringing. Well, my friend sat behind me, had his mobile phone, and phoned his house phone at the exact same moment that it started ringing in the film. And obviously his house phone started ringing. So I obviously wet myself sitting there being like, oh, fuck!
Yeah, it's perfect.
So, that's probably the earliest memory I have of sitting there and watching a horror film.
Oh, there you go. And that's, that might lead on to my next question then. I mean, you were struggling to think of a movie that scared you. That sounds like that scared you.
That moment scared me. I suppose if I watch the film now, it probably not so much.
No.
But it's interesting, this whole conversation. We've had this dialogue before this podcast whilst we've been talking here and to now about what's actually scared me now. Inland Empire is so scary. I thought it was when I first watched it, and I watched that in 2006 when it first came out, and I would have been, I think, 15 or something, which the film was a 15, and I watched half of that film, and then I had to close my laptop. I was watching it on a DVD that I bought on my a little laptop, and I was very late at night, and I watched half of it, and then I had to stop, close the laptop, put it on the other side of the room, and had to wait until it was light the next day before finishing it.
I mean, David Lynch is one of those people, again, I've talked about him already on episode 1 as well, but none of his movies you could consider horror movies, but they all have elements of them that are terrifying.
Get under your skin.
Mulholland Drive, I think, has one of the scariest moments in film, which is the thing behind Wendy's diner, the dream.
Everyone jumps.
Brilliant. Well, I think we've pretty much talked about everything we can possibly talk about in terms of Psycho and Peeping Tom.
Lovely speaking
and
to you,
we've
Michael.
veered off. It's been amazing. Where can people find you, Ollie, in the world if they want to find you on social media or your writing or anything like that?
For now, the best place to find me is on Twitter.
Yes,
at Ollie Charles. I hope that if you find me on Twitter, I'm a little bit amusing, at least. I try hard, very, very hard, believe me.
Good.
That's probably the best place.
Excellent. Yeah. Good. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
So that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and I want to say a huge thanks to my co-host for this week, Ollie Charles, and of course my brilliant guest, Neil Brand. Now don't forget, you can hear my whole full hour-long chat with Neil Brand on a bonus episode, which is coming out over the next few days, so please do subscribe to us on iTunes or SoundCloud or YouTube or whatever platform you prefer in order to get there first and listen to that. Now, do get in touch. We want to hear from you. I want to hear what your thoughts are on Psycho and Peeping Tom, and also horror music. What's your favourite horror movie score? Any random thoughts, please do feel free to send them over. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com, or you can tweet at evolutionpod. Please do subscribe to us on iTunes if you get a chance, and if you do get a minute, please leave a rating or review. Thank you so much for all the people that have done that so far. It really helps us. We managed to get on the iTunes homepage this week in the special featured section, so that's really great, and that's all down to the lovely feedback that I've been getting from all of you guys, so thank you so much. So next week, we're going to continue exploring the evolution of the slasher, but we're going to venture away from Hollywood and away from the UK and over to Italy as we look at the Italian horror boom that happened in the late 60s and 70s, known as GIALLO. Now, I'm going to be joined by the brilliant Dan Martin, who's one of the co-hosts of the brilliant Arrow Video podcast, and together, me and him are going to review Mario Bava's amazing, monumental proto-slasher Bay of Blood, or Twitch of the Death Nerve, and Dario Argento's debut feature, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. On top of that, I am also going to be joined by a brilliant critic and scholar and broadcaster and author. He's the man who literally wrote the book when it comes to Argento and Giallo, and he also happens to be the director of Fright Fest. He is, of course, the brilliant Alan Jones. So be sure to join me next week for all that and more on the evolution of horror.